Hunger changes what you're willing to eat faster than you'd like to admit. And by the time a rat crosses your cell floor, you've stopped thinking of it as vermin and started thinking of it as dinner. Tonight, you're not just hearing about a medieval prison. You're living inside one, and by the time we're done, you'll understand exactly why out of sight, out of mind was practically a legal strategy back then. If you're enjoying these journeys into history, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. Now let your body sink into stillness. Let your breathing slow, and let's step into that world together. The door doesn't creak dramatically the way you'd expect. It just closes, a dull, unremarkable thud, followed by the considerably less unremarkable sound of a lock turning on the outside. And that's it. No ceremony, no dramatic final words, just you, a stone room, and the sudden, sinking understanding that this door opens from the other side only. The darkness takes a moment to adjust to, mostly because there isn't much light to adjust to in the first place. A narrow slit high on the wall lets in a thin blade of daylight, just enough to confirm that yes, it is still daytime somewhere, even if it doesn't much feel like it in here. Medieval prison architecture, it turns out, was not designed with natural lighting reviews in mind. You're not alone. Other shapes shift in the gloom. Other prisoners who arrive before you, some slumped against the walls, some watching you with the particular flat expression of people who've long since run out of curiosity about new arrivals. Nobody introduces themselves. This isn't that kind of room. The floor is stone, cold enough that you can feel it straight through whatever you're wearing, layered with old straw that's clearly seen better decades. Somewhere in the corner, something small scurries, unbothered by your arrival, which tells you almost everything you need to know about how long it's called this room home. There's no explanation of the rules, no orientation, no helpful welcome packet. You're expected to simply figure it out the same way everyone else in here did, through trial, error, and the occasional sharp lesson from someone who's been here longer than you. As your eyes finally adjust fully to the gloom, one thought settles in with unwelcome clarity. Whatever happens next, whenever that turns out to be, is entirely out of your hands now. All you can do is wait and try to figure out how everyone else in this room has managed to still be alive. It's worth pausing here on something that might surprise you. In this world, ending up exactly where you are right now doesn't require anything particularly dramatic. No grand heist, no plotted rebellion, no daring escape gone wrong. Sometimes it's as simple as owing money you couldn't pay, or being accused of something by someone with more influence than you, whether or not it actually happened. Medieval justice, if you can call it that, moves at its own unhurried pace, largely because nobody involved is in any particular rush except you. There's no scheduled court date waiting in a diary somewhere. Trials happen when a magistrate feels like holding one, which might be next week, might be next season, and might, in a few memorably unfortunate cases, simply never happen at all. You could be here for debt, the medieval solution to unpaid bills being, apparently, to remove the debtor's ability to earn any money whatsoever. A plan with all the long-term financial planning of a toddler. You could be here for a minor theft, a stolen loaf, an argument that escalated somewhere it shouldn't have. Or you could be here because someone with a grudge and slightly better connections decided an accusation was easier than resolving the actual disagreement. There is, refreshingly, no need for overwhelming evidence. A confident accusation, delivered by the right person to the right ears, can be more than enough to land you exactly where you're sitting now. cold stone beneath you, and considerably more time to think than you'd like. Some of the other men in the cell have been waiting weeks. A few, if the rumors whispered in the dark are accurate, have been waiting considerably longer, their cases apparently misplaced, forgotten, or simply never a priority for anyone with the authority to move them along. And so you wait, too, along with everyone else, for a summons that might come tomorrow, might come next month, or might simply continue not coming. One indistinguishable day quietly folding into the next. Once your eyes fully adjust, the cell reveals itself in unflattering detail, and, if you were hoping for a pleasant surprise, medieval architecture has never once been in the business of delivering one. The walls are damp stone, cold to the touch, sweating faintly with a moisture that never quite dries no matter the season. Someone, at some point, clearly decided this was fine. The floor is scattered with old straw. Though calling it bedding is generous, it's less a comfort measure and more a thin, ineffective barrier between you and stone that would otherwise remind you exactly how cold the ground can get. It hasn't been changed in a while. You can tell there's no furniture to speak of, no bed, no table. Nothing resembling the basic amenities you might have taken for granted just this morning. A shared bucket sits in the corner, serving a purpose you'd rather not think too hard about, and quickly becomes something everyone in the room has strong, if silent, opinions about. Space is limited, which means personal space is a luxury nobody here can afford. You share this small room with several other men, all breathing the same stale air, all navigating the unspoken etiquette of close quarters with strangers who didn't choose each other's company any more than you chose theirs. And then there's the wildlife, because apparently even a locked stone room isn't secure enough to keep out rats determined enough to try. They move along the walls with the casual confidence of creatures who know exactly how the food situation works around here. Occasionally close enough that you start eyeing them the same way they seem to be eyeing you. It's not so different in its own bleak way from the world's least appealing summer camp, minus the campfire songs, minus the eventual trip home, and considerably heavier on existential dread. As the light through that narrow window begins to shift toward evening, one thing becomes very clear. Whatever comes next, you're going to be spending a great deal of time getting far too familiar with every inch of this room. Here's a detail that tends to catch people off guard. In many places, there's no assumption that a prisoner will simply be fed. Feeding you isn't automatically anyone's responsibility, which means your survival depends heavily on factors entirely outside your control. Namely, whether anyone on the outside remembers you exist and is willing to do something about it. Families, when they can, bring food, bread, cheese, whatever they can spare, pass through to the jailer with the hope that it actually reaches you rather than mysteriously vanishing somewhere between the door and your hands. It's a system built almost entirely on trust, which, given who's running it, might be the single most optimistic part of this entire arrangement. If nobody comes, or nobody can afford to, your options narrow considerably. Some prisoners share what little they have, a kind of grim, practical solidarity among people who understand that today's generosity might be tomorrow's survival. Others don't share at all, and nobody here really blamed them for it either. This is roughly the point where the rats stop being simply an unpleasant feature of the room and start becoming, uncomfortably, a consideration. Nobody enjoys this realization. Everybody eventually has it anyway. Usually somewhere around the third day of insufficient bread and a stomach that's stopped politely asking and started actively complaining. There's a strange kind of hierarchy that forms, too, unofficial, but unmistakably real. Those who've been here longer tend to know the system, who to trust, who to avoid, which corner floods less when it rains. Newcomers learn quickly, mostly by watching, occasionally by making a mistake that someone else is happy to correct, loudly. It's a bit like the world's worst shared apartment. Minus the security deposit, minus any hope of finding a better living situation on short notice. And with roommates who were, admittedly, not exactly given a choice in the matter either. As hunger becomes a familiar, constant companion, you start to understand something the older prisoners already know well. Surviving in here isn't really about strength. It's about patience and a stomach willing to reconsider its standards. If there's one person whose mood matters more to you right now than your own, it's the jailer, a man whose job description seems to consist entirely of holding keys and deciding, largely on a whim, how unpleasant your day is going to be. Jailers in this world aren't salaried the way you might expect. Many earn their living charging prisoners for basic privileges, better food, a slightly less miserable corner of the cell, occasionally even the simple mercy of lighter chains. It's less a justice system and more a very grim, very captive marketplace, where the only currency that matters is whatever you or your family can scrape together. This means uncomfortably that your experience here depends less on what you actually did and considerably more on what you can afford. A prisoner with money and connections might enjoy meals, visitors, even a somewhat tolerable existence. A prisoner without either gets exactly what you'd expect, which is to say, very little, and none of it pleasant. The jailer himself is rarely a simple villain, though he's rarely anyone's idea of a hero either. Some are indifferent, doing the bare minimum required and no more. Others are outright cruel, having apparently decided somewhere along the way that a locked door and a set of keys is basically a personality, and every so often, rarely enough to be memorable, you'll encounter one who shows an unexpected flicker of decency, a slightly larger portion, a moment of actual conversation, treated by everyone here like a small miracle. Corruption isn't the exception in this system. It's essentially the operating model, so thoroughly normalized that nobody even bothers being subtle about it anymore. Bribery isn't whispered about in dark corners. It's practically a formal part of how things work, openly discussed the way you might discuss any other unavoidable household expense. You watch the jailer make his rounds, keys jangling with the particular self-importance of a man who knows he's the only person in this hallway currently capable of making anyone's life measurably worse, and you file away, quietly, exactly which version of him you seem to be dealing with today, because in here, that small piece of information might matter more than almost anything else you know. There's a particular kind of illness that seems to live in places like this, one so common it has its own grim nickname among people who understand exactly what it means. Jail fever, they call it, and once it starts moving through a cell, it doesn't much care about your innocence, your guilt, or how patiently you've been waiting for a trial that still hasn't come. The conditions here practically send out invitations. Cramped quarters, poor air, contaminated water, weakened bodies already running on insufficient food. All of it forms exactly the kind of environment disease treats like a welcome mat. It spreads fast, sometimes faster than any actual legal process ever manages to move, which is its own quietly dark irony worth sitting with for a moment. You watch it happen gradually, then suddenly. Someone coughs a little too much one evening. A few days later, they're sweating through fevers that don't break. Skin taking on a pallor that makes everyone else in the room instinctively put a little more distance between themselves and him. Not that there's much distance to be had in a room this size. Medical care, in any meaningful sense, isn't really part of the arrangement. There's no physician on standby, no medicine beyond whatever herbs or remedies someone might have smuggled in, most of which do considerably less than anyone hopes. Mostly, you watch and wait, and quietly reconsider your own cough from earlier with a great deal more concern than you would have yesterday. Time itself starts behaving strangely in here, days blurring together with nothing to distinguish one from the next, except meals, when they come, and the shifting quality of light through that one narrow window. It's a bit like the world's least relaxing staycation, minus the relaxation, minus the staying anywhere you'd choose, and with a noticeably higher chance of leaving in considerably worse condition than you arrived. By the time evening settles in again, you find yourself doing something you didn't expect to be doing this early into your stay, quietly taking inventory of your own body, checking for symptoms, hoping today isn't the day jail fever decides to notice you specifically. By now, you've settled into a rhythm you never wanted, one built entirely around a single unanswered question. When exactly does this end? Some men in this cell have started treating the waiting itself as a kind of second sentence. One nobody officially handed down, but everyone here is quietly serving anyway. When judgment finally comes, and it does eventually for most, it doesn't necessarily arrive the way you'd hope. Trials here can be surprisingly brief, sometimes little more than a magistrate hearing both sides for a few minutes before deciding your fate with roughly the same energy. Someone today might use choosing what to have for lunch. In some places, older methods still linger too, trial by ordeal, where guilt or innocence gets decided by something like surviving an injury or how a wound heals. Logic that made sense to somebody once, presumably. You watch it happen to others before it happens to you, and it's an education you didn't ask for. One man is released after weeks, his case apparently resolved by someone finally remembering he existed. Another is fined an amount his family can't possibly gather, which functionally means staying exactly where he already is, just with slightly more paperwork attached to his misery now. A third disappears entirely one morning, and nobody in the cell seems to know, or wants to guess out loud, exactly where he went. There's no predicting which outcome waits for you specifically. No clear pattern connecting what you actually did to what eventually happens. Wealth helps. Connections help more. Beyond that, it often comes down to whichever version of the magistrate happens to be paying attention that particular day, assuming he's paying attention at all. It's not so different, in its own bleak way, from waiting on some bureaucratic decision today with absolutely no timeline and no customer service line to call for updates. Except here, the stakes involve considerably more than a refund. As you watch yet another name get called, yet another fate decided in minutes after weeks of waiting, one thing becomes clear. Whatever verdict eventually finds you, it will likely arrive suddenly, with almost no warning at all. After what feels like an eternity of nothing happening whatsoever, somewhere in the long stretch of waiting, you notice something you didn't expect to notice. Small moments that manage to survive even in a place built almost entirely around discomfort. Tonight, it's the older man across the cell, the one who's clearly been here far longer than anyone else, quietly tearing his own bread in half without a word and passing part of it your way. He doesn't explain himself. He doesn't seem to expect thanks either. Just a brief nod before turning back to whatever private thoughts have been keeping him company these past weeks or months. It's such a small gesture, objectively. Half a piece of bread in a place where bread itself is already scarce enough to matter. And yet it lands heavier than it has any right to. You learn, in fragments over the following days, a little of his story, though nobody here shares much more than they have to. He mentions almost offhandedly that he remembers what it felt like on his first night too. The disorientation, the fear, the particular loneliness of a room full of strangers who've stopped being strangers only because circumstance forced the introduction. There's an unspoken code among some of the men here, worn in gradually over time. You don't ask too many questions. You don't take more than your share when someone's clearly running low. And when you can, without it costing you anything you can't afford to lose. You extend whatever small kindness circumstances still allow. It's not so different, in its own strange way, from any group of people thrown together by something none of them chose. Coworkers surviving a difficult season, strangers stuck together during a delay, people who'll likely never see each other again once circumstances change, yet somehow still show up for one another while they're stuck in it together. That night, chewing slowly on bread you didn't have an hour ago, you find yourself thinking less about the trial you're still waiting for, and more about the strange, quiet decency that manages to survive even here, in a room that seems otherwise built to strip it away entirely. Lying against the cold stone tonight, half a piece of borrowed bread still sitting warm in your stomach, it's worth sitting for a moment with everything today has actually asked of you. Not dramatic heroics, not some grand test of strength, just the slow, grinding work of enduring something with no clear end in sight, one uncertain hour after another. Maybe that's the real story hidden inside a place like this. Not that people here are especially brave. Most of them would probably tell you they're simply doing what anyone would do in their position. But that ordinary endurance, quietly repeated, day after uncertain day, turns out to be its own kind of strength, even when nobody's handing out medals for it. Whatever tomorrow brings, a summons, another quiet day of waiting, or simply more of the same uncertain nothing, tonight at least, you're still here, still breathing, still, somehow, holding on to whatever small decency this place hasn't managed to take from you yet. And on that note, this particular day and this particular story comes to its close. Wherever you're listening from, whatever weight your own day carried, let it set itself down now. Nobody's coming to check on you tonight either, but for entirely different reasons. You're simply allowed to rest,